There's a certain kind of peace that can't be explained by circumstance. It doesn't come from a perfect situation, a lack of problems, or the absence of uncertainty. In fact, it often shows up in the middle of pressure, loss, or change. That kind of peace isn't man-made, it's divine. It's the first clear sign that God is leading you on the right path. You begin to experience a deep, unshakable inner calm, even while the world around you feels chaotic. Now, let's be clear. This peace isn't about denial. It's not pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's not blind optimism or shallow positivity. It's a grounded stillness rooted in trust. Trust that even if you don't understand where the road is taking you, you're not walking it alone. This peace shows up in your decisions. You stop second-guessing so much. You're no longer haunted by constant what-ifs. There's a quiet sense of alignment inside you, even if the outcome is still hidden. You can't always articulate why, but deep down, you just know you're where you're meant to be. This is where psychology and spirituality intersect. From a psychological point of view, the human brain is constantly scanning for threats, uncertainty, and risk. It's wired for survival, not serenity. So when you experience peace that contradicts your environment, peace during financial struggle, peace after rejection, peace in waiting, it's a signal that something deeper is governing your perception. It means your spirit is leading, not just your mind. You're not reacting from fear, you're responding from faith. That's not normal, that's supernatural. Philosophers have long spoken of this state. The Stoics called it ataraxia, tranquility of the soul in the face of uncertainty. But where Stoicism sought to detach from emotion, divine peace invites you to feel everything without being ruled by anything. It allows you to grieve and still believe, to struggle and still trust, to not know and still move forward. And that's the real miracle. Not that life gets easier, but that your soul becomes steadier. This kind of peace also changes how you make decisions. You stop chasing things out of desperation. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop trying to control every variable. You begin to walk by clarity, not control. And here's the paradox. When you let go of the need to control everything, you often gain the very clarity you were chasing. You begin to see that peace isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of guidance. It's God's fingerprint on your path. So if you're walking through a storm, and yet your heart feels strangely calm, don't ignore that. That's not numbness. That's not coincidence. That's divine confirmation. Because when God is leading you, His peace goes before you, even when the path doesn't make sense. You don't need to see the whole map. Sometimes all you need is the stillness that says, keep going, I'm with you. And that stillness, that quiet voice that silences the noise, that's not just a feeling, it's a sign. One of the most revealing signs that God is leading you is when things begin to align without force. The right people enter your life. Unexpected opportunities emerge. Conversations happen at just the right moment. It's not magic, and it's not mere coincidence. It's alignment. It's a deeper orchestration unfolding behind the scenes, often so subtly that you might miss it unless you're paying attention. We live in a culture that glorifies hustling and grinding for every inch of progress. And yes, hard work matters. Discipline matters. But when you're walking the path designed for you, when you're in step with divine timing, you'll notice that not all doors require you to knock. Some simply open. Some people show up not because you networked your way to them, but because your growth pulled them in. When you're on the path God has set, divine appointments start replacing random encounters. This is where psychology offers an interesting lens. Carl Jung spoke of meaningful coincidences or synchronicities, events that seem unrelated but carry deep personal significance. These moments feel like nudges from something higher, a reminder that you're not operating in isolation. But while Jung saw these events as reflections of the unconscious, spiritual clarity lets us see them as evidence of divine orchestration. It's not just your subconscious drawing connections, it's God making connections. Philosophically, this challenges the assumption that life is only random, mechanical, or chaotic. When you begin to walk in purpose, patterns start to emerge, you stop chasing, things start arriving. And here's the shift: you become less obsessed with how it's going to happen and more aware of the rhythm of how things are unfolding. You're no longer trying to manufacture momentum, you're flowing with it. This isn't passivity, it's alignment. There's a big difference between forcing something and being faithful to a process that's already moving in your favor. The people you meet in this season often carry messages, opportunities, or lessons you couldn't have accessed on your own. And it's not always glamorous. Sometimes it's a difficult conversation that turns into a breakthrough. Sometimes it's a rejection that reroutes you into the right environment. You realize that not everything that shows up is meant to stay, But everything that arrives on your path is meant to teach, lead, or confirm. The key is to stay aware. Discernment matters here. Not every open door is divine, and not every person is sent. But when God is guiding you, the alignment will feel different. It won't require manipulation. It won't drain your spirit. You'll know it by the fruit it produces: peace, clarity, and the sense that things are finally moving in the direction they were always meant to. So pay attention to the timing, pay attention to the people, and most of all, pay attention to how little you have to force when you're following the right path. Because when the right things start showing up without you chasing them, that's not luck. It's guidance. And guidance always leaves a trail if you're willing to follow it. A common misconception is that being on the right path means life gets easier, that everything just works, that hardship disappears, that pain fades into the background. But the truth is often the opposite. When God is leading you, challenges don't stop, they just start to serve a higher purpose. The obstacles don't vanish, they refine you. They don't destroy you, they transform you. This is one of the most misunderstood signs of divine direction. Many people assume that resistance means misalignment. That difficulty is a sign to quit. But spiritually speaking, pressure is often the clearest evidence of progress. Growth always brings friction. If you're being stretched, tested, even broken down at times, it may not mean you're off course. It might mean you're finally on it. There's a psychological pattern here worth noting. When we encounter adversity, our brain interprets it as a threat. The natural reaction is avoidance: get out, escape, retreat. But growth demands discomfort. The path to anything meaningful always includes resistance, because resistance is where transformation happens. It exposes what's weak and strengthens what's essential. This isn't just neuroscience, it's soul work. Look back at your life. Think about the seasons that shaped you the most. Were they the easy ones, or the ones where you were forced to confront yourself, dig deep, and rise? Often, it's not the victories but the valleys that taught us who we really are. When God is leading you, even pain becomes a tool. The situation that once felt like it was sent to break, you may have been sent to build you into someone stronger, wiser, and more equipped for what's ahead. Philosophers like Kierkegaard wrote about the suffering that awakens, the moments of crisis that draw us closer to truth, to purpose, to God. He believed despair wasn't the end, it was a doorway, and this is where faith enters. When you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this shaping in me?" That shift in perspective is everything. But again, discernment matters. There's a difference between unnecessary suffering caused by poor choices and purposeful struggle allowed by divine timing. One drains you, the other develops you. One keeps you stuck, the other invites you forward. And you can usually tell by what the struggle is producing in your spirit. Is it growing your patience? Humbling your pride? Increasing your dependence on something greater than yourself? If so, you're not being punished, you're being prepared. So when life gets heavy, don't assume you've lost your way. Don't mistake the fire for failure. Sometimes the presence of struggle isn't a sign to turn back. It's a sign to press in. Because when God is leading you, even your battles have purpose. Even your wounds become wisdom. And what once felt like resistance becomes evidence that you're being shaped for something you're not yet ready to carry, but soon will be. Pain with purpose is never wasted. One of the most profound signs that you're being led by God is when your desires begin to shift. Sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, but always in the direction of something deeper. What used to thrill you starts to lose its appeal. What once defined your goals begins to feel empty. You're not just thinking about success anymore, you're thinking about meaning, about legacy, about alignment. This shift isn't forced. It happens quietly, almost without your permission. You wake up one day and realize you no longer crave recognition, you crave authenticity. You're less drawn to noise and more attracted to depth. You start measuring value not by how much you can get, but by how much you can give. That's not just maturity, it's a spiritual recalibration. Your desires are being refined by purpose. From a psychological perspective, this is a form of identity evolution. As we grow, the ego starts loosening its grip. You stop chasing identity through external validation and begin grounding it in internal truth. That's not easy. The ego hates to give up the spotlight. But when you're on the path God has set, the hunger for impact starts to outweigh the hunger for applause. And that's how you know something divine is taking over your motives. Philosophically, this speaks to a deeper human yearning, the desire for transcendence. Thinkers like Viktor Frankl believe that meaning is not just a luxury, it's a necessity. We don't live well without it. When God is guiding your life, you begin to sense that your personal goals are part of a larger story. You stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, what was I created for? That's a fundamental shift, and one of the clearest signs that you're walking the right path. It doesn't mean ambition dies, it just becomes purified. You still want to build, to grow, to win, but now those desires are connected to service, to truth, to something eternal. And ironically, that's when things begin to accelerate. When your heart lines up with your higher calling, there's less friction, more clarity, more flow, because now you're not just working for something, you're working through something greater than yourself. This alignment also gives you resilience. When your motivation is rooted in something deeper than ego, setbacks don't derail you as easily. You're no longer doing it for applause, so silence doesn't scare you. You're no longer doing it to prove something, so rejection doesn't shake you. That's when your path becomes unshakable, because it's not built on your need to be seen. It's built on your commitment to be useful. So if you feel your desires shifting, if you're starting to care more about purpose than performance, more about contribution than competition, pay attention. That's not confusion. That's confirmation. Because when God is leading you, what you want begins to reflect who you're becoming. And who you're becoming is the real evidence of divine direction. Another subtle but deeply powerful sign that God is guiding you is when clarity starts to come, not through noise, but through stillness. You begin to hear more in silence than you ever did in chaos. Instead of chasing endless advice, waiting for big signs, or getting lost in external distractions, you start sensing direction in quiet moments. Not always with words. Sometimes just with peace. Sometimes with a gentle nudge. Sometimes with the deep knowing that doesn't scream, it whispers. And it's in this quiet that your spiritual hearing sharpens. We often expect divine guidance to come dramatically, through miracles, through voices, through signs in the sky. But the deeper you grow, the more you realize God often speaks clearest in the still spaces, in the pause between decisions, in the breath between moments of anxiety, not because He's hiding, but because silence requires presence. And presence is where transformation happens. Psychologically, this taps into the power of reflection. In a world addicted to stimulation, stillness feels foreign. We scroll, we consume, we multitask, constantly filling silence to avoid discomfort. But silence is where integration happens. It's where your conscious mind slows down enough for your deeper wisdom to rise. Your intuition, what many spiritual traditions would call the voice of God within, can't compete with constant noise. It doesn't force itself on you. It waits for your attention. Philosophers like Pascal once said, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And it's true, because in silence, we come face to face with ourselves and with something greater. We see through our illusions, our attachments, our performative thinking. And in that space, truth has a chance to speak. Not the truth we manufacture to feel better, but the truth that brings us into alignment even when it's uncomfortable. When God is leading you, you begin to trust this stillness. You start seeking it. You stop needing to consult a dozen opinions before moving forward. You stop asking the world for validation and start listening inward for confirmation. Not because you know everything, but because you're learning to follow the voice that does. And that voice rarely raises its tone. It speaks calmly, consistently, and often with fewer words than you expected. This kind of inner clarity becomes your compass. You don't need to rush every decision. You don't need to announce every step. There's a quiet confidence that begins to form in you, a peace that doesn't demand understanding before moving forward. And that peace is proof that you're not alone in your process. So if life feels uncertain, but silence is starting to bring clarity, don't run from that. Sit in it. Lean into it. Because when God is leading you, He doesn't always shout over the noise. He teaches you how to hear Him beneath it. And that kind of clarity, it's not just insight, it's sacred direction. One of the most telling signs that God is leading you is this: you begin to act with more courage and less fear. Not because the fear disappears, but because it stops controlling you. There's a noticeable shift. You stop waiting to feel completely ready, and you start stepping forward anyway. And that decision, to move despite fear, is not impulsive. It's rooted in trust. It's a quiet, growing confidence that you are being supported in ways you can't fully see yet. When divine guidance is active in your life, you'll notice yourself taking risks you would have avoided before. You'll say yes to opportunities that once terrified you. You'll walk away from situations that no longer serve your growth, even when staying feels more comfortable. You begin to live by conviction, not just comfort. That kind of shift doesn't come from ego or adrenaline. It comes from alignment. You're no longer being driven by fear of failure. You're being pulled forward by a sense of purpose that's stronger than your doubts. Psychologically, Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the decision to act despite it. Neuroscience tells us that fear is one of the brain's most primal responses. It's designed to protect us from danger. But the brain can't always distinguish between risk and purpose. It often interprets growth as a threat. So when you begin stepping out, making bold moves, following instincts that don't yet have proof, that's not foolishness. That's faith maturing. That's evidence that something higher is guiding you beyond your natural limits. Philosophically, this speaks to the idea of transcendence, the moment when the soul stretches beyond survival and into intention. You stop living reactively and start living deliberately. It's not that fear disappears, but it loses its authority. It no longer gets the final word. And that shift is everything. Because fear will always have something to say, but when God is leading you, his voice becomes louder. And let's be honest, courage doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's having that hard conversation. Sometimes it's walking away from what's familiar. Sometimes it's choosing integrity when compromise would be easier. These aren't always the kinds of moves people applaud, but they're the exact moments when your direction is being shaped. You're learning to obey a higher voice, not the louder one. The more you follow that voice, the bolder you become, not because you trust yourself more, but because you trust God more. And that kind of trust creates momentum. It opens doors that were once locked by hesitation. It gives you clarity where fear only gave you confusion. And over time, you realize something powerful. You were never waiting for fear to leave. You were waiting to trust that God was already ahead of you. So if you feel fear but keep moving, if you're stepping forward not because you're fearless, but because you're faithful, that's not weakness. That's spiritual strength, because when God is leading you, courage becomes your new normal. And that kind of courage doesn't just change your path. It transforms who you are becoming on the journey.